Hello, and welcome back to another update where I cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. It is your host, Weeb Union, and in this one, we start out in the Kursk direction, where the Russians and the Ukrainians are each launching their own offensive operations. The Russians have managed to capture the village of Uspinovka here along the border between Russia and Ukraine, securing further parts of the border area here in the Kursk region. At the same time, they've also started pushing towards Nikolaevo Drerino here along the Snagost River. The Russians have already crossed the river line in the direction of Drerino, and now they are fighting towards Nikolaevo as well. This means that the Russians continue putting pressure here on the southern parts, where they look to cross the river line and gain a foothold on the eastern bank. The objective may be to gain control over the fortified area, where they can re-establish a fortified position, create a strong flank for further offensive operations towards the rear of Sutsha. At the same time, we see that there is one main supply road for the Ukrainians in the Sumy region towards the Kursk region that goes through here the southwest of Sutsha. This highway here is connected all the way towards Sumy. If this one road is cut off, then the situation becomes much more difficult for Ukraine to resupply, especially with this new development. The Deep State map team received some complaints that the Ukrainian soldiers were having a hard time arriving to the front line in the Kursk region due to terrible roads. And as we see in the footage here, there is piles of dirt. According to the Deep State map team, farmers in the Sumy region are destroying roads and ruining the pathways to prevent the Ukrainian armed forces from resupplying and arriving at the front line in the Kursk region. Based on this, it is unlikely that it will have a devastating effect, but it will have a major effect if the farmers continue with this, as it could delay supplies in a very crucial moment such as this one, where the Russians are launching their own counter-offensive. So we see that the Russians continue pressuring the Ukrainian positions, and the Ukrainians have managed to capture the village of Olgovka for about the third time in this conflict here in the Kursk region. At the same time, Deep State map comes with a very interesting statement. They talk about the town of Kremyanoe here right in this direction. It has switched hands many times due to the reports, but according to Deep State Map, this is their statement. They talk about how the Ukrainians entered the town of Kremyanoye on the very first day of the Kursk offensive. The settlement was operationally encircled according to them. Recently, it was possible to completely encircle the group in the village. However, although they are fully encircled, periodically, they manage to send out troops, gain new troops, resupply, gain ammunition, and everything else that you shouldn't be allowed to do during an encirclement. This brings a very serious question towards the trust anyone puts towards Deep State Map, because if they so clearly lie about something, claiming that they are fully encircled, they just somehow periodically manage to resupply, that just goes against common sense, like a very basic understanding of anything. According to the reports, there have also been several reports about completely clearing out Kremyanoe, full control of it by the Ukrainians, but the Russians are still there. In the first days, due to a lie from someone in the Ukrainian infantry, the Russians shot point blank at the armored vehicle of one of the commanders of one of the Ukrainian battalions. So we see that there's a lot of misinformation regarding this settlement, and it is clear that whatever the Deep State map claims, or whatever the Ukrainian side claims, has to be taken with a grain of salt in this case, since as soon as someone trusted them, they got shot at point blank. So we see that the Russians continue their resistance in the town of Kremyanoe. What the front line looks like exactly, it is not clear, but it is clear that heavy fighting takes place. Something else is that, compared to my earlier reporting, the soldiers fighting at the front line are much less open about their developments. So now we only get territorial changes when a village is cleared, or when heavy fighting has taken place within the village for some time. And even at that point, we do not get clear information. Sometimes it's contradicting information on who actually controls the village. Other times it's a 50-50 split, like Lyubimovka. We see that heavy fighting is taking place, but the only footage we have of this area is the following, where a Russian armored column gets a foothold on the western parts of Lyubimovka. Since then, there's been reports of the expansion of the front line in this direction, where the Russians are moving through the village, gain control of the majority of it, but it is no clear reports on it, unlike the Battle of Bakhmut, for example, where we got reports about the exact street that the Russians had captured, what buildings were fought over, and so on. So we got a very detailed mapping of it. This time we only get rare reports about significant changes, like the capture of this entire field area as well as Uspinovka, and a fighting arriving at Nikolaevo Perino. All of this while the Russians continued offensive operations in the east. Here as well, we see that the frontline fighting takes place on a constant basis, but due to how the front lines are really aligned, some days we see advances in some areas, like today we see several advances in this section right here, and yesterday we saw several advances further south. That is not because they attack in the south one day and attack in the north the other day, but simply because these are the changes that happen today, while over a long period of time, several places were seeing heavy fights, yet no changes were really taking place until now, where they have been confirmed. An example of this is in the Toretsk direction, where the Russians have managed to capture the southern part of the micro-district in the southern parts of Toretsk. This entire area was not captured in a single day, but has been fighting that has been continuing for almost 3 weeks. And this is the results of that fighting, and the Russians have now reported about this 3 weeks later. So we see that several developments take place, but they are reported late due to the more organized operational secrecy of the troops at the front line, not just from the Russian side, but the Ukrainian side as well. With this development here to the south of Toretsk, we see that the Russians are expanding their zone of control and strengthening their foothold in the southern parts. Together with the advances in the northern parts as well, it's only a matter of time until the Russians connect the tips between the southern and northern type, which will gain control over the forest area and the Terikon hill here in the southern eastern parts of Toretsk, and the fighting will reach the next main area, which is the central parts of Toretsk and western parts of it, with the hills to the southwest of Toretsk and the apartment complex area, industrial area, and the central parts of Toretsk, which the main fighting of the city will take place in. If the Russians gain control over that, then the city of Toretsk can be considered taken. So therefore we see that the heavy fighting is all pointing towards the Russians moving in the direction of that to start the final battle of Toretsk, and this would significantly weaken the Ukrainian front line in this section. Just north of Toretsk, the Russians are continuing their foothold across the canal, as is seen with this geolocated footage. The Russians are here moving to strengthen their positions on the western bank of the canal and move in the direction of Supushki, which will allow the Russians to gain a strong foothold on the western parts of it and to flank the Ukrainian fortified positions on the western bank. This will likely be combined with an effort to cross over from the northwest of Ivanivsky and connect in the southern bank of Chasiv Yar. Chasiv Yar is a city with multiple districts and it's not a concentrated one. This means that the Ukrainian defenses in the area are also spread out and more coordinated from a distance. This also means that they are able to work in a more decentralized manner, where a group can move to the south to deal with this Russian crossing. So we'll likely see heavy resistance by the Ukrainians to prevent a Russian breakthrough here in the south, but it could also weaken their positions in the north. Therefore, it means that the Ukrainians will not be able to concentrate their forces, and the Russians have expanded their front line significantly from the point at which the Ukrainians simply had just a small area to defend, which was the micro-district, allowing them to concentrate their forces and firepower on that direction. The front line has now significantly expanded. Moving further north to the Kreminna and Kupiansk section of the front line, we see several developments here. Starting out, we have a Ukrainian advance to the east of Zarishne and Toretsk, where they managed to recapture some fortified positions on the outskirts of the town. This further secures the Ukrainian positions in the area, as they want to prevent the Russians from gaining control over the eastern bank of the Sirbis River line, which is an important defensive position for the Ukrainians in the area. However, the Russians have managed to take advantage of the recent developments in Makiyivka to concentrate their forces further south in the direction of Nevsky, and an assault has taken place, which has allowed the Russians to advance significantly in the direction of Nevsky and expand their zone of control in the forest areas and fields here to the east of Nevsky. So we see several developments taking place here in the Sirbis River line, where the Ukrainians are trying to secure their positions near Liman on the eastern bank of the river line, and the Russians are slowly moving down south along the Sirbis River line to gain full control over the river line itself, at the very least the eastern bank of it. In the direction of Pishane, the Russians are now only 2 kilometers from Kozlynikivka. The Russians have continued pushing west of Pishane following the capture of it. They've managed to move a lot in the direction of Kroklyakivka, as well as Kozlynikivka here to the west on the eastern bank of the Uska River line. They've also managed to secure the fortified positions north of Pishane and push further in the northern direction. Yesterday, they secured the town of Tabaivka by pushing the Ukrainians back from it, and now they are expanding further in the northern direction to secure the next first line and creating a stronger flank for their positions in Pishane. The Russians also need to secure their southern flank of Pishane if they want to launch further offensive operations on the eastern bank of the Uska River line. The objective of the Russians will to secure the several villages along the eastern bank to secure a defensive line to the south, where their objective then would be to launch offensive operations in the northern direction towards Kupiansk. They recently gained a foothold within Petropavlivka in the northwestern outskirts of it, following the capture of Senkivka, which means that the Battle of Kupiansk may start in this month or the next one. We see generally throughout the front line that the Russians are continuously advancing all throughout it. The Ukrainians are launching some positional fighting and counterattacks here and there. They continue their Kursk offensive despite the Russian Kursk counteroffensive, which raises the question as to the sanity of such an operation. But we do see that this is what is happening, and I'll be reporting on whatever happens. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and check out my Patreon and YouTube membership for additional content. Check out the video on the screen if you want to learn more about my mapping style and the current situation. Thank you all for watching, and have a great day.